allowed to go on a class trip to D.C., for example, because they worried about the documents needed to get her on a flight. Rodriguez wasn't deterred, focusing on her academics, getting straight A's, and gearing up for the road ahead at her college prep charter high school. But when President Barack Obama signed his Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, initiative in 2012, she didn't realize how much it would benefit her until a counselor urged her to apply. And it turned out that DACA, which lets undocumented immigrants who meet a variety of requirements, including having entered the U.S. before they turn 16, obtain work permits, enroll in college, and legally remain in the United States for at least 2 years, was enormous for Rodriguez, then a high school junior. It was scary giving all of this information to immigration, Rodriguez recalled. So her high school brought in lawyers to help her and other students applying for DACA fill out their applications, which was a relief for frazzled families who couldn't remember exact dates and addresses. Still, Rodriguez's family worried about willingly handing the government information it might use to deport them. Among many other things, all of Rodriguez's fingers were scanned, and just like that, she was in the system. My dad said, "Don't ever get in trouble. They'll run your prints." While Rodriguez waited for final word on her application, every knock on the door triggered concern. Was it immigration? The police? It was suspenseful, Rodriguez said, but once I got the card, we knew we were safe. That feeling didn't last. At the end of her junior year in high school, Rodriguez joined the ranks of the documented, now about 800,000 people. They are elementary school teachers, baristas at Starbucks, electricians, and graphic designers, most from Mexico, but also from Central and South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Because you had to have come to the U.S. before age 16 to be eligible for DACA, they are integrated into American society, growing up knowing the country's pop culture, cuisine, fashion styles, and media. Being born in Mexico but raised in the United States, Rodriguez often feels caught in the middle. There are people who tell her, "But you don't look Mexican," and others that say, "Oh, your English is so good." Her ties to Mexico are there, but loose. It was just a few years ago that Rodriguez met her grandmother for the first time when the elder Rodriguez was able to get a visa and fly to the United States. And Rodriguez herself hasn't returned to Jalisco or anywhere else south of the border since she left at age 3. After high school, Rodriguez moved west to California, choosing Pomona College because it is a DACA-friendly school, focused on enrolling the best students regardless of their citizenship status. Its former president, David Oxtoby, wrote an open letter signed by dozens of other college presidents across the country, urging President Trump not to go through with his threats to rescind DACA. Rodriguez is now the head mentor for a DACA support group, and last semester worked 3 jobs and took 5 classes. This year, she's still fully enrolled with 4 classes, but will work 4 jobs. Her citizenship status and heritage came to the forefront during the 2016 presidential campaign when Trump talked about Mexico not sending their best immigrants, promised to build a huge wall along the border, and called Mexicans rapists. When he was elected, all of my friends and family were in tears, Rodriguez said. It was very much the beginning of uncertainty. We weren't sure what he would do with DACA, and that didn't protect our parents. They said they won't target students, but they had our addresses. It was a big burden. If anything happened, it was because of me, because I gave information. In the days after the election, Rodriguez said she envisioned states following in Arizona's footsteps, passing bills like SB 1070, a 2010 law that let law enforcement check the immigration status of a person if they had reasonable suspicion they were not legally in the state. I didn't know how conservative Illinois was, and if police would start asking for citizenship status and start targeting undocumented people, she said. There were so many questions. How am I going to go home for winter break? Summer break? Is that even possible? Would my parents be able to come to graduation? It was very emotional. But there was little to do but sit tight. So just as she waited to find out about the status of her DACA application, Rodriguez waited to see what Trump would do about the program. There were mixed messages, with Trump saying in February that he would deal with DACA with heart, but ultimately trotting out Attorney General Jeff Sessions on September 5th to say the act was being rescinded. He called DACA an unconstitutional exercise of authority by the executive branch and claimed hundreds of thousands of Americans had been denied jobs because those same jobs went to illegal aliens. Mere days later, President Trump appeared on the verge of formalizing a deal with Democratic leaders to protect DACA recipients. Rodriguez is hopeful that there will still be a push for a more permanent solution for immigration, but what she wishes most of all is that people understood DACA and the clear requirements. To get approved, the recipients must have no criminal record, show proof of arrival, is in school or has a high school diploma, GED certificate, or is an honorably discharged veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, among other things. It doesn't give recipients carte blanche to take any job they want or start collecting public benefits. People saying, immigrants are taking all our jobs. You have a social security card, a resume. You come in as an immigrant, you take any job you can, regardless of the pay rate, she said. Want to apply for field work or as a janitor? Please, go for it. Rodriguez struggles to imagine what her life would be like if she's deported to Mexico. All she knows about Mexico is what she hears on the news and reads on the internet, and that's it. I have no idea how the government works, the jobs there are. It's very much a foreign country, which is sad for me. I love the culture, the music, the language, and that's my parents' home. I was born there, but when I consider home, it's always going to be Chicago. Rodriguez would be considered a foreigner in the country of her birth, with people being suspicious of this new person who speaks English and has no accent. The tension between the United States and Mexico also would potentially make a return risky, as it would be obvious she was American. She doesn't know any Mexican slang or what people wear or the social norms. I have a fear of being deported, a fear of not being able to come back, a fear of not being accepted in the country where I was born, she said. I don't even know if the government would help me and take me in. I know in the U.S. I can't apply for government aid, but can I do that in Mexico if I haven't lived there for the past 20 years of my life? There are so many gray areas. Mexico is dealing with its own immigration issues, with undocumented people from El Salvador, Honduras, and other Central American countries making their way north. Both in America and Mexico, Rodriguez hopes to see the narrative switch, with the stigma that comes from being an undocumented immigrant removed. Immigration laws are always targeting immigrants in a way where people think they must be doing a bad thing, she said. There's a strong rhetoric, and the media essentially paints a picture. So if one immigrant does something bad, all immigrants are bad. But you can't blame all immigrants. The truth is, immigrants are more likely to be law-abiding because they don't want their status to be found out. And it shouldn't be about us versus them. All of our stories are different. There is no story that is a collective of all immigrant stories, especially for those of us brought over as kids. Rodriguez is grateful to her parents for setting out to make a better life for their children. It was a matter of survival, and she benefited by growing up in Chicago, where she learned English and attended supportive schools. The United States is bursting with opportunity, she said, and if her parents had remained in Mexico, the options would be bleak. I'm pretty sure I'd be doing domestic work now, cleaning houses and trying to make do day by day, Rodriguez said. If I had stayed, I wouldn't have been able to go to college because I wouldn't have been able to afford it. Here in the United States, you work hard and you can do whatever you want. That's always easier said than done, and some people don't have to work as hard as others, but there's still that hope. Rodriguez wants to attend law school after she receives her undergraduate degree, either focusing on corporate or immigration law. In Mexico, I don't know if I'd be married with kids already, but that would very much be my future, she said. I don't think I'd ever be able to consider being a lawyer because those resources just wouldn't be there. I know one thing for sure, I'd be struggling. But for the documented, life in America is not without its struggles either. So that's just one story, and like she said, there is no one collective story that all immigrants share, but that gives you some sense of what it's like for DACA recipients, or what it has been like for DACA recipients. And so hopefully when you hear that and then you compare that to what these, I wanted to say bozos, but I'll be nicer, these Republican senators who are offering their conservative vision of something other than amnesty. We can't call it amnesty. Their conservative vision of what sort of a dream act would be like. Apply that thinking to this person, for example, and see how fitting it is. Does it sound like she requires extreme vetting and a medical test, and that she should wait 15 years to become a citizen? I don't know. I don't think so. So interestingly, this is from ABC. Just so you get a sense of how politics are entering into this situation, this is entitled, Americans Back DACA by a Huge Margin. So a vast 86% of Americans support a right to residency for undocumented immigrants who arrived in the United States as children, with support crossing the political spectrum. 2/3 back a deal to enact such legislation in tandem with higher funding for border control. Possibly in light of President Donald Trump's decision to phase out the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, disapproval of his handling of immigration overall reaches 62% in this new ABC poll. Just 35% approve. Additional hurdles for Trump are his demand for a wall on the U.S. border with Mexico. Again, 62% oppose it. And substantial concerns about his immigration enforcement policies. Americans were asked whether they support a program that allows undocumented immigrants to stay in the United States if they arrived here as a child, completed high school or military service, and have not been convicted of a serious crime. All elements of DACA, established by Barack Obama by executive order in 2012. Support spans demographic groups, including 3/4 of Republicans and conservatives, 86 and 87% of independents and moderates, and 97 and 96% of Democrats and liberals. Support reaches 94% among Hispanics, 93% among blacks, and 84% among whites. Strong support, 87% among Hispanics and 85% among blacks, declines among whites to 61%. Trump early this month said he would rescind DACA, giving Congress a 6-month window to act before nearly 800,000 undocumented immigrants lose protection from deportation. He later reached a tentative agreement with top congressional Democrats for DACA legislation, accompanied by upgraded border security. As noted, 65% support that potential compromise, a bipartisan result, with 76% support among Republicans, 66% among independents, and 59% among Democrats. Similarly, 71% of moderates, 66% of conservatives, and 56% of liberals back the deal. Just 27% of Americans in this poll are opposed. So, there's a lot more numbers here. Well, I'll just go on reading. There are more numbers. I know that's hard to listen to. 33% said this, blah, 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 blah. It's weird to listen to that. But, okay, just 30% of Americans say Trump has immigration enforcement about right, compared with 44% who say this was so before he took office. Nearly half, 45%, say immigration enforcement under Trump is too tough, much higher than 6% who say this was the case before he took office. That said, 49% say enforcement was not tough enough before Trump took office. Just 22% say so now. Matching the numbers who disapprove of Trump's handling of immigration overall, 62% oppose his promise to build a wall along the Mexican border. This has held steady since Trump first proposed it. 55% also oppose cutting legal immigration by half. another proposal backed by Trump. In contrast, 79% support requiring employers to verify that new hires are here legally, a current requirement with stricter enforcement on the table. In a general measure of suspicion, just 12% of Americans think undocumented immigrants commit more violent crimes than other people in the country, which is, of course, completely not true. The vast majority instead say they commit violent crimes at either an equal or lesser rate than U.S. citizens. It isn't actually a lesser rate, in case you're wondering. Approval of Trump's handling of immigration is stronger among those who think undocumented immigrants commit more violent crimes than U.S. citizens. It drops to 33% among those who think crime rates are the same, and 12% among those who think they are lower among undocumented immigrants. Views on Trump's handling of immigration are highly partisan. 3/4 of Republicans and 61% of conservatives approve, versus a third of independents and moderates, 10% of Democrats, and 8% of liberals. Differences also emerge by demographic groups. 43% of men approve versus 28% of women. Americans over age 40 are more apt than younger adults to approve. 42 versus 24% among those younger than 40, and while 46% of whites approve, this drops to 13% among both blacks and Hispanics alike. So these are interesting numbers, and they show that people can hold very different opinions about different aspects of the immigration question. There's not a consistency. But one thing that there is a consistency on here is that across the board, people generally approve of giving DACA recipients some access to citizenship. So when these senators come out and say that they have a conservative vision for how to do that, they're not really speaking of conservatives. They're speaking of sort of a radical subgroup of conservatives. And that should be noted and remembered, because conservatives and liberals and moderates and most everybody, the majority of all those groups believes that at least the DACA recipients deserve some sort of path to citizenship. And again, jumping back to what I was saying near the beginning, it's absurd to divide people into these groups anyway. As has been stated more than once on this show and in an article that I read, every person that comes here has a different story for why they're here, for how they got here, for what they hope to do here. There are some general themes, maybe. You know, they're looking for opportunities, they're looking for freedom, to cut down on the potential for violence. You know, these sorts of things. There are kind of general themes, but basically people's reasons for making this kind of step in their lives, for taking this kind of step, differ according to the individual. Everybody has their own reason for why it's worth it to them to do something like this. And it's a big step. As I've said many, many times before, nobody just gets up one day and goes, what'll I do today? I could take a nap, or I guess I'll just pull up my roots and go to the U.S. and live there and suffer whatever hardships that are attendant with that idea. Nobody does that. It's a well thought out decision in virtually every respect. It's something that people struggle over and finally go, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it because, I need to do it for whatever this personal reason I have is. And they should not be treated as just some across the board, like, oh, this group. There's a group of people, and out of that group of people, there is a small subset. Out of the possibly 11 million individuals that are here without documentation, there's just slightly less than 1 million of them are worthy because they were brought here as children, and they are in school full time, and they have lived in the same place and not left the country, and they maybe are in the military, and this whole list of things that describe the current DACA holders, and probably a much tighter list that would describe the people that would be eligible under the Succeed Act. And yet that is how we look at them. Each level of attention by the government narrows the group that is considered worthy. The DREAM Act itself is a vast narrowing of who is considered worthy of our acceptance. So it's problematic in itself. And then when you take that and confine it down to a certain subgroup of that group, and then a smaller subgroup of that who are finally considered worthy of waiting 15 years before they can get citizenship. I don't think so. That's just absurd. It's really absurd. Okay, so I'm not even going to read this next story. There's not enough time, and it's too long. I really need to get to this next bit, because this is just happening or just happened right now, and we're running out of time here. This is the new updated travel ban, and I thought I would share this with you. This is what we know about it so far. This is from the Washington Post. So it says, the Trump administration announced new restrictions Sunday on visitors from 8 countries, an expansion of an existing travel ban that has spurred fierce legal debates over security, immigration, and discrimination. In announcing the new rules, officials said they are meant to be both tough and targeted. The move comes on the day the key portion of President Trump's travel ban, one that bars the issuance of visas to citizens of 6 majority Muslim countries, was due to expire. Quote, as president, I must act to protect the security and interests of the United States and its people, Trump wrote in a proclamation announcing the change for citizens from specific nations. Of course, he doesn't mention the protection and security and interests of the people in Puerto Rico, who are now suffering horribly after the hurricane that Trump seems to have completely ignored. He doesn't care. He's gone to Texas. He's been there to help out, or whatever he calls what he does. But Puerto Rico, nah. He couldn't care less. Anyway, on Twitter he added, making America safe is my #1 priority. We will not admit those into our country we cannot safely vet. Trump's original travel ban, signed as an executive order in the first days of his presidency, was always meant to be a temporary measure, while his administration crafted more permanent rules. A senior administration official cautioned that the new restrictions are not meant to last forever, but are necessary and condition-based, not time-based. The new travel ban represents the 3rd version offered by the Trump administration. 3 nations were added to the list of countries whose citizens will face restrictions: Chad, North Korea, and Venezuela, although the restrictions on Venezuela are narrowly crafted, targeting the country's leaders and their family members. One country, Sudan, fell off the travel ban list issued at the beginning of the year. Senior administration officials said a review of Sudan's cooperation with the U.S. government on national security and information sharing showed it was appropriate to remove it from the list. The new restrictions will be phased in over time, officials said, and the restrictions will not affect anyone who already holds a U.S. visa. For those visitors affected by the changed restrictions, the new rules will go into effect October 18th, according to the proclamation. The new rules vary per country, barring entry into the United States of immigrants and non-immigrants from Chad, Libya, and Yemen on business tourist or business tourist visas. It bars entry of Iranian citizens as immigrants or non-immigrants, but provides an exception for Iranian students, provided they receive extra screening. The proclamation bars immigrants and non-immigrants from North Korea and Syria. It bars immigration by citizens of Somalia. Critics of the administration have argued that the travel bans are an unconstitutional attempt to deliver on Trump's campaign promise of a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Administration officials deny that any of the bans were aimed at Muslims, saying they are based on security concerns about visitors from countries with failing or weak governments. The restrictions, either previously or now, were never, ever, ever based on race, religion, or creed, one senior administration official said. Those governments are simply not compliant with our basic security requirements. Anthony Romero, executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, said adding North Korea and Venezuela to the administration's list does not fix the travel ban's core problem. Quote, President Trump's original sin of targeting Muslims, he said, cannot be cured by throwing other countries onto his enemies list. End quote. The original version, signed as an executive order in January, blocked citizens of 7 majority Muslim countries: Iraq, Iran, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Yemen, and Syria, as well as all refugees across the globe. When the measure was blocked in court, Trump signed a revised order removing Iraq from the banned list and only barring the issuance of visas to citizens of the 6 remaining countries and all refugees. The second order, too, was blocked by judges, but the Supreme Court in June allowed it to go into effect with a significant caveat. The administration, the court said, could not block from entering the country those with a bona fide connection to the United States, such as family members of those with firm offers of employment. The ban on citizens of the 6 countries was to last 90 days. The ban on refugees was to last 120 days. The refugee ban is set to expire October 24th, and it was not immediately clear what impact the new restrictions might have on it. The Supreme Court has scheduled arguments for October 10th on whether the measure at its core is legal. The Justice Department signaled Sunday night that the new rules could affect how the court handles the case. Lawyers for the administration filed a letter asking for new court briefs to address issues raised by the new rules. In explaining how the administration came to cite these 8 countries, officials said many governments already met U.S. requests, using secure biometric passports, for example, and willingly passing along terrorism and criminal history information. Others agreed to make changes and share more data, but some were either unable or unwilling to give the United States what it needed. The president had signaled earlier this month that an expansion of the travel ban was likely. Citing an attack in London, Trump wrote on Twitter, "The travel ban into the United States should be far larger, tougher, and more specific. But stupidly, that would not be politically correct." Okay, I am not going to go into any conversation about that because my time is up. But just wanted to let you be aware of this so you could start thinking about it and thinking about what it means and how it might affect you or someone you love or someone you know or someone in need or anyone. Really, it's worth thinking about and knowing what your government is up to. Anyway, I'm out of time. You have been listening to CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5, 4.5 FM, 104.5 FM. I will see you next week. Until then, bye-bye.